everybody. Let's go over to the bottom of page 14 where we left off, I think. Anybody got any questions on what we covered last week? You see, we've lost a lot of people this week.
Yeah, that's all.
No, we haven't even gotten through the first step.
Ready yet?
All right, guys. Okay. So we talked about at the bottom of the page and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. If an alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he cannot survive the certain trials and those spots ahead. Everybody understand that? That working and sacrificing ourselves for other people is not an option. It's not something that's maybe a good idea. It's something that we have to do. Okay. So go down to the bottom of page 15, like almost to the end of the page. It says, "There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us." And you know, there's numerous times in the book that it talks about that. I think on page 45 and on page 52 it talks about that. So, and of course in the 12th step it talks about that. There's scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. So we can solve all my problems with this here. And then on the last page of Bill's story, the last paragraph, he says, "Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. And if you don't have utopia right here and right now, you need to get busy in doing the work." So, I think we covered Bill's story good enough. Does anybody got any questions about anything we went over in Bill's story? No questions at all? All right, go to page 17. Page 17, chapter 2. There is a solution. Now, for those of you that are new, or this is your first time going through this course here, in other words, not you guys that have been through this once, twice, or 10 times. What does the chapter tell us? Just the chapter. What does the chapter tell us? There is a solution. That there's hope. Okay. What else? Anybody else? No comment?
What does it tell us?
Not you. You've been through this before. It's in your notes somewhere there. Probably right in your book, right?
The power of a spiritual experience.
It's what is it?
The power of a spiritual experience.
There is a solution. So I understand what you're saying, but the title doesn't actually tell us that.
Oh, you know the title.
Just the title.
We can't be cured, but we can be.
Huh?
We can't be cured, but we can find an answer to the problem.
Okay. I like the second half of that.
There is a solution.
It explains the solution.
Huh?
It explains the solution.
Well, the title itself doesn't. It just
Right,
tells you that there is a
But the
solution.
chapter itself.
Yeah, the chapter, yeah. Well, so that's just the title right now.
Okay.
There is a solution.
Somebody said hope, right?
Hope? Yeah, absolutely. It tells us a few things. We've been through this now. I don't want you to yell out the answer. It doesn't do anybody any good yelling out the answer.
It's timeless. There is, so it's timeless.
Okay. The operative word here, though, is A, the word A, If you look at that, it's very important because that is singular. Okay? So what it's telling us is that there is one solution. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous acknowledges the fact that there's other ways to get sober. Now, we don't have a lock on sobriety. Alcoholics Anonymous acknowledges the fact that there's people, it even tells us in our literature that people, can get sober other ways. We don't have a lock on sobriety. But those other ways to get sober, maybe through a psychiatrist, maybe through church, maybe through some, a doctor telling you something, whatever. There's other ways to get sober. My oldest brother is a born-again Christian. He's been sober about 40 years. And so I know for a fact, in the early 70s, he was a bad heroin addict. And I know for a fact that there's other ways to get sober because he's proof of that. He got sober way before I did. And he's never been to a 12-step meeting. So there are ways to get sober. But what this is telling us, as far as we're concerned, Alcoholics Anonymous, we only have one way to do it. So if you're interested in a religious solution, go to church. If you're interested in a psychiatrist getting you sober, go see a psychiatrist. But Alcoholics Anonymous has a solution. We have a singular solution. One solution. Okay? It doesn't say there are solutions. There is a solution. And that's what we're gonna point out here in this chapter. Go over to page 25 real quick. We're going to come back to page 17. But on page 25, first paragraph, in that squiggly writing, it says there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, that would be step 4, you could write that in your book. The confession, that would be step 5. Of shortcomings, that's 6 and 7, which the process requires for a successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, that's step 2. And we have come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we have been living it, step 1. And the rest of this is basically step 3, the rest of this paragraph. So, in this paragraph that is squiggly writing telling us there is a solution, it covers the first 7 steps. Oh, hold on, we got now. Right, we're back on. Okay. That was a quick one. 4 of us are watching. Hi, guys. All right, so this is what I want to tell you guys. I want you to understand this. The process of recovery is the first 7 steps. The process of recovery is the first 7 steps. After you have completed the first 7 steps, you have completed the process of recovery. Now, I know some of you guys are sitting here thinking, well, there's 12 steps. What's the other 5 for? But look at the other 5 steps. They're more about fixing up the things on the outside and improving our relationship with God and helping other people, aren't they? The first 7 steps is more personal. It's about me working on me. Okay? So according to this book, according to that paragraph that lays out there as a solution, it goes over the first 7 steps. And that's our solution. We do have 12 steps. We need to work all of them. We need to practice all of them, but we have the first 7 is what's going to set us apart. Now, let's go back to page 17 then. So in this chapter, I want to talk about this for a minute. there's two powers. There's two powers and one solution. Again, not for those that have been here through this before, but for the other people. What might the two powers be? What do you think the two powers are?
Spiritual experience.
Huh?
The spiritual experience.
Okay, but what brings about the spiritual experience?
It's the fellowship and the steps, right?
The fellowship and the steps? Okay. Fellowships and the steps. Who else got something to say about that? Two powers.
Two powers would be main, like, what else?
Now, the power, Melissa was half on track there.
Faith and willingness?
The two powers are the power of God and the power of the fellowship. Those are two powers. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Some people stop drinking and drugging, they come into recovery, and they tap into the power of the fellowship.
Right.
If you've been around, you've seen people like that, and they're on fire. And they can stay sober for days, weeks, months, and years. There's some people that stop drinking and drugging, and they come into recovery, and they tap into the power of God. And they're on fire also. And they can stay sober for days, weeks, months, or years. And some people stop drinking and drugging, and they come into recovery, and they tap into the power of the fellowship and the power of God, and man, they're really on fire. And they can stay sober for days, weeks, months, and years. But all three types of people that I just described to you have one thing in common. None of them have taken the solution. They've only tapped into a power. Are you with me? Does that make sense what I'm saying? The solution is the steps. We just talked about it. We just went over the first 7 steps where it says there is a solution. So these people that come into the rooms and tap into the fellowship, and they're running around, they're joining every committee, they're doing everything, you see them, doing everything they can, they're really into the fellowship, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. And some of them come in and they tap into God and they're on fire, and some of them come in, tap into the fellowship and God, to those two powers, they're really on fire. But all three of those types have not taken the solution. They've just tapped into a power. Eventually, that power that they've tapped into will waver. And you could be here for 5 years, and you could be sober on the power of the fellowship or the power of God and the power of the fellowship and God, and never taken the solution, and 5 years later, something tragic happens in your life, and you've lost the power of God, and you've lost the power of the fellowship, even if it's momentarily, just long enough to take a drink. Because the people that come in here and take the solution change who they are. That's what recovery does to us. It changes us. The process of recovery will change who you are. When I crawled into these rooms, I was a drunken adult fiend, and I couldn't go 5 minutes without a drink or a drug. And that's my truth. But because I've taken the steps, I've changed who I am. Now, if you've only tapped into one of the powers, you haven't changed who you are. You've been abnormal all the time you've been sober because you've been tapped into a power that's helped you stay abnormal. And that power cannot last indefinitely. What you've tapped into cannot last indefinitely unless you've changed who you are. Because that is the solution that Alcoholics Anonymous offers us. It doesn't offer us the solution of a fellowship or a solution of God. It also offers us a solution of the 12 steps, which will put you in touch with a wonderful fellowship and a powerful God. Does that make sense? So we need to be really careful that we, again, the best description I ever heard anybody say is like, is if you want to get to the top, you got to climb the steps. If you climb the step, and as you climb the steps, you hold on to the banister, that's the fellowship. It's easier to climb the steps if you're holding on to the banister. So if you're tapped into the fellowship, it's easier to do this deal. So they're all necessary, but don't mistake the fellowship for the solution. Don't mistake that stuff. The activity. Remember the first week we talked about the word action and activity? I said we always confuse those two. Action is a continuous purposeful movement, always toward a goal. Activity is not. Activity is the hamster on the wheel thinking he's going somewhere and ain't going nowhere. And that's what happens when you tap into the power of the fellowship and not take the solution. You're the hamster on the wheel thinking you're going somewhere, and eventually the roller coaster stops and you're lost. And so it's very powerful. Sometimes it's so powerful that it keeps people sober for years. I told you, I sponsored a guy with 45, 47 years sober. Never really went through the book. But if you be a real alcoholic, you're going to be in trouble if you don't take the solution. Okay? The power of the fellowship is not going to keep you sober forever. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, so back on page 17. He says there in the second paragraph, we are people who normally would not mix. And that's obvious if you look around the rooms, right? We're just people that normally wouldn't mix. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is incredibly wonderful. That it is. We're like the passage of a great line in a moment after rescue from shipwreck, when commonality, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element. So the fellowship, he's talking about the fellowship here, right? That's just one element. This is telling us right here, the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in this powerful cement which binds us. Look what he says. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. So the fellowship alone ain't going to do it. That's what the book is telling us. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So we have a way out on which we can absolutely agree, and the way out on which we can absolutely agree is the steps. That is the solution. So the way out is not the fellowship, it's the steps. Because it's telling us the fellowship is not going to hold us together the way we are now. All right. So he says, an illness of this sort, and we have come to believe in an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness. And then he goes on to talk about, if you got cancer, people are going to look at us different, treat us different. But with this stuff here, we suffer from, people don't understand it. And that's one of the hopes they had in writing this book, that people would understand us better. So now look what he says in the fourth paragraph down. It's all squiggly writing. He says, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Now, I think last week I said to you that until you can relate to somebody, you can't begin to recover. You remember I said that to you? Until you relate to somebody in the rooms, when you hear somebody sharing something, whether from the podium or just in a regular meeting, until you hear somebody sharing something that you relate to, you can't begin to recover. Because each and every one of us sit there thinking about how different we are, how unique I am, how you don't understand what I've been through. We all have those kind of thoughts. Some of us may think we're worthy, some of us may think we're too worthy, it doesn't matter. We all think that we're not really in the right place, and that this is really not for me, this is really not going to help me. Until somebody shares exactly how you feel, or how you felt, and exactly what you've done. And when you start hearing that, you can begin to recover. And that's what he's telling us here. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Now he's saying that the one that's going to bring that message to you is another alcoholic. Remember in the doctor's opinion? He talked about, what were the words that he used when frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, remember? You know, how loved ones want to tell us how they love us and we shouldn't be doing that, and that seldom works, right? But when an alcoholic starts telling you about what Bill and Bob did, was and Bill D, when the three of them went and they'd start talking to other alcoholics, and they would go there and they would tell them about their own experience drinking. And the person they were talking to was going, huh, yeah, sounds like me. These guys know what they're talking about. And they began to relate, and when they began to relate, they began to recover. So you can't take somebody and hope that they recover. You have to have them relate first. That's what all the stories are in the back of the book for. That's what Bill's story's at the beginning for. So some people can relate. Somebody can relate. Everybody in this room right now is necessary in Alcoholics Anonymous. You may find this hard to believe, but some people don't really care what I got to say. I know, it's crazy, right? But the truth is, some people don't care what I got to say, but only what you have to say, somebody needs to hear. So shame on you if you're not here to say what you need to say when it's your time to say. So every one of us is necessary because there's somebody out there that's sick and suffering and dying and can only relate to what you got to share. And that's what makes each one of you special. You have the power to help somebody recover because you have recovered. And last week I said to you, stop telling people you don't know how this works, right? Because if you've done this deal, you know how it works. And we were talking before the meeting, that doesn't mean, I want you to understand, that doesn't mean that I'm taking a cocky position where I'm taking credit for my recovery, but it means that I understand how I did this and how it works. And God, if I didn't understand how this works, how am I going to help somebody else understand how this works? So I share with you to stop saying I don't know how it works, because there's somebody that needs to hear what you have to share. And if what you're sharing is you don't know how this works, then I shared with Donna and John before the meeting that I was about a few months sober, and I'm sitting in a speaker meeting with my sponsor, and the guy had like 15 years sober. And almost the whole time he talked, he was sharing about he's powerless over this, he's powerless over that, he don't know how this works, he don't know how none of this stuff works. And after the meeting was over, I said, what the F am I doing here? I'm wasting my time. This guy's been here 15 years. He's still powerless over everything. I want to tell you, I don't share that stuff. I don't share that. You know why I don't share it? It's not my truth. I'm not powerless. I'm not powerless over alcohol. have solved the drink problem. I'm not powerless over this and that and this and that. I have a solution that works on everything. See what this says here? You don't have a problem. You have a solution you don't like. Right? And by the way, I always write stuff down. You don't have to write them down. It's just saying. You know. But that's really the truth. Whatever problem I have is not really a problem. The struggle is in the solution. Do I want to do it or not? All right, so back on page 18. Now he's giving a little advice to us when we work with other people. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he's talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. I'm not too sure about that one. These are the conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. You know, and I think on the page before that, it said, in the bottom of the first page on 17, and in the bottom it says, we have a way out. Remember it says that? For those of you that don't know it, though, that was supposed to be the name of our book. A Way Out. And then when the members of Alcoholics Anonymous went to the Library of Congress to put the name of the book in, there was 12 other books entitled A Way Out. And they didn't want AA to be number 13. Good drunks. So they decided not to call it A Way Out. And it's been known since then as Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So, now look at the first paragraph on 19. None of us make a sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. So, even if a lot of people get sober and they want to become an alcohol and drug counselor, right? You probably run into many people like that, and I'm one of them. I'm one of them.
Everybody.
I was a counselor for 5 years, but I learned something from an old-time AA lady when I first started working in the field, and she taught me the greatest lesson. And what she told me is that this is a job, and when you leave here, you better get your ass to me. And the sickest people I ever met in recovery are the counselors in these treatment centers that believe that that's their treatment, that that's their recovery. Yeah, and that old lady who's dead now, but she taught me a great lesson, and I'll always be thankful to her for that. So it doesn't matter if that's your job, that's your job. So he's saying here that if nobody's gonna, it's not going to make us any better if we do this all the time, right? Now look what he says here. We feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. Elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. So when I finish working the steps on alcohol, I have to work them on everything else. Again, I stress that a lot because I can't tell you how many people I've met over the years that's been sober for so long, and they've only worked the steps one time on alcohol or alcohol and drugs. And I don't know, I ain't met nobody that good that don't have other issues. And there's people here, all you guys that are sober for a while, you all have picked, I hope by now, something that you're working the steps on. And we shared last week, some people working the steps on food, and again, that's got to be the toughest thing in the world to work the steps on. It would be for me, since I work with food.
Good food.
My favorite food.
So whatever you're working steps on, you know, that's what we do. We continuously grow spiritually as we continue to work the steps on different problem areas in our life. Look what he says here. We feel that the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated they can give nearly all their time to their work. So, home, work, and dealing with you people. I mean, for me, I remember early on in my recovery, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd make my conscious contact with God, and I'd get straight with God, and everything was good, and I'd leave my house and I have to deal with you son of bitches. And there go my day, you know. So I need to learn how to do this in all my affairs. At work, you know. You'll hear a lot of things in meetings. I call it 12-step bullshit, you know. But, you know, people share meetings, we're not running nothing, you know. If you have your own business, you're running something, you know. And so it's not that we're not running nothing. I'm trying not to run my life unattended today. I try to connect with God and a sponsor and you people and help run my life, right? But there's things I'm running. I'm a self-employed person. I'm running some stuff, and if I don't understand that and stay on top of it, I run my shit right into the ground. So there's things that we need to be on top of. So, you know, don't believe everything you hear in the meetings. You know, a lot of stuff sounds good, it just don't mean shit, you know. So again, it's not. I'm not trying to run my life today on self-propulsion, as the book talks about. But I need to be able to practice these principles at home. My wife is not one of us. She's a normie. Normies really need this program. My wife has no desire to pick this book up and do any work in here. And, you know, I wish she would, but, you know. But I've come to understand in our relationship that I can take care of my part, you know, and I don't, you know, I know how she is and the way she is, and nothing I can do about those things, and so I don't even try. It's none of my business. All right. So he's talking now, go down to the third paragraph, he's talking about we have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. Okay? We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem. So, you're going to set forth the problem first, right? Remember I told you it's broken down into three parts. What is the problem? What is the solution? What is the program of action? And as we go through the book, we'll see those three parts in there. And so right now he's telling us that he's going to set forth what the problem is, as they see. Of necessity, there will have to be discussion of matters medical, psychiatric, social, and religious. We're aware that these matters are, from their very nature, controversial. Nothing would please us so much as to write a book which would contain no basis for contention or argument. We shall do our utmost to achieve that ideal. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as these problem drinkers depend on our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So now he's talking about here's one of the first questions in this first chapter on page 20. he's talking about you may already ask yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless, you're curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from the hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? Right, we talked about this on week 1, right? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. So if you want to know what you have to do, this book is going to specifically tell you what you have to do. So for those that still think there's no right or wrong way to do this, this is to the contrary of that. There is a right way and a wrong way. And this is going to tell you what you have to do. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points here. Okay. Go to the bottom of the page here. And now he's going to give us 3 types of drinkers. Okay? And the first type of drinker is moderate drinkers, have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have a good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. That's the first type of drinker. Okay? The second type of drinker is then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have had the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or warning from a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome, he may even need medical attention. Okay? And now the third, the rest of this page and the following top of the next page is something that you need to read very carefully. You need to study this page. You need to find yourself in here. If you can't find yourself in here, you may not be in the right place. Because this describes people like us pretty good. Here is the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world. Yet, let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment. Does any of this sound familiar? Particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect, he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. Remember we talked about, I think we used Deb as an example in the wood cabin with in the cabin in the woods with the wood-burning stove. Remember we talked about that and we said that Deb is a sensible, friendly, intelligent person, but when it comes to wood-burning stove, she ain't got a damn bit of sense. Well, that's what he's describing here. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning, he searches merely for a bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. And there again, they're drinking and drugging in the big book.
Man.
Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative which will taper him off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. So, I mean, that's the real alcoholic right there. Now look what he says on the bottom of page 22. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense. See, there's again, mark that again in your book. Bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm them. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. So, these observations would be academic and pointless. What observations? Hello? What observations?
How he reacts,
Huh?
how he reacts to drinking again.
Yeah, the observations that he just said.
Begins to
We're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. These observations would be academic and pointless if he never took the first drink. So we've already acknowledged that we have a twofold disease, mental and physical, mind and body. So I have a twofold disease. Which one can we do something about? Huh?
The body.
The body? Who said the body? Okay, anybody else? Anybody for the mind? Raise your hand if you think the mind. Okay? And raise your hand if you think the body. Susan got all bases covered. Okay, this is a little bit confusing, but follow me here. We have a twofold disease, mental and physical, mind and body. The only one we can do something about is the body, is the physical. Because we cannot not think. It is impossible to not think. We even think when we're sleeping. It's called dreaming. Okay? So, I am not responsible for what comes into my head. And I want to tell you, if you knew what came into my head, you would probably clear out of the room pretty quick. Because some sick shit comes into this head on a daily basis. I'm not talking cured here, okay? We're not responsible for what comes into our head. We are responsible for what we do with that information or that thought. But we cannot control what we think. Okay? So, on the other hand, the physical part, I have the ability to not put it in my system. I can control that. It may be very difficult. It may be nearly impossible. It may seem like an unreasonable thing, but it is true nonetheless. I have the ability to not put it in my system. Therefore, I can control the physical.
You know, that's hard to think about, you know, because that's always an argument with the people that say it's not a disease, it's a choice and all that. I think I'd seriously have to handcuff my hands together or something. I mean, I don't wait to have the ability.
People say it's not a disease, it's a choice.
Well, the people that say that in the argument that I hear, you know, and they're always like, you don't have to, you know, you don't have to put it.
Well, the next time they say that, tell them just choose not to then.
Well, I mean, like, it's people that aren't.
You could do the Nancy Reagan, just say no.
If people that aren't addicts or alcoholics, they don't get it. I mean,
That's
you
like
know.
that's like telling a homeless person, just get a house.
Oh, dude, don't even
You know.
start me on that subject.
You know,
But, I mean, like, the people that aren't drug addicts, alcoholics, but I hear that.
they don't understand.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, that's what we were just
But I don't
talking
feel
about.
like, I mean, maybe it was completely mental, but
No.
I don't feel like I have the ability not to.
You see, my mind's going to tell me that I can do it. My mind's going to convince me that I deserve to do it. My mind's going to, the greatest lie that we have, no matter who you are and where you come from, if you're one of us, the greatest lie that we have is this time it'll be different. It doesn't matter if you come from a farm in the middle of Oklahoma or in the Bronx in the middle of the city, it doesn't matter. Or Ethiopia or Rome or wherever you come from. If you be an alcoholic, the greatest lie is this time it's going to be different. There's a lot of other lies, but that's the biggest one, right? So, so I can't control what my mind tells me. I can't control what comes into my head. But I can not put it in my system. I have that ability. It may be very difficult. I may need help. But I have the ability to not put alcohol or drugs into my system. And if I can do that, if I could do that, not put it in my system, then I'll never have the phenomenon of craving. Because we already talked about it. The phenomenon of craving is a physical reaction to the alcohol if you set the allergy off. So he says these observations would be academic and pointless. In other words, if they wrote that in today's times, it would say, what I just said don't mean shit if you didn't take the first drink. In today's lingo, that's what that says, okay? Thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. I asked you a question, all you had to do was read the next sentence, you would have got the answer. The answers are always in the book. So therefore, the main problem the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. The main problem centers in my mind because I can't control what I think, what comes into my head. But I can control the physical aspect of it and not put it in my body. It's important you understand that. So if you ask him why he started on the last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of having an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with the hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. So the truth of the matter is, you really don't know. You really don't know why. I don't know why I do it when I just swore that I would never do it again. Do you remember that before you got sober? Do you remember looking yourself in the mirror and going, I swear to God, I'm never going to do this again. And meaning it with every fiber of your being, right? I swear to God, I'm never going to do this again. And then you're doing it again. That's powerless, people. When you do what you swear you're never going to do again, when you do what you every fiber of your being don't want to do, and you do it anyway, you're powerless. Remember, I asked people before, why are you powerless? I wrote it on the board a week or so ago. Why are you powerless? Most people don't understand. Every time you ask somebody why you're powerless, they begin to tell you what happens after they drink. I can't control it. It controls me. You've missed the point. If I ask you why you're powerless and you tell me what happens after you drink, you've missed the point. I already know what happens after you drink. You can't stop. We don't know. Every one of us can attest to that. But if you know you shouldn't do it, and you don't want to do it, and you swear you're never going to do it again, and then you're doing it, the next thing you know, that's pretty powerless. When you do what you don't want to do, and you can't stop yourself from doing it, that's powerless. That doesn't mean why, though. You still got to figure out why, which we will. Once you know the truth about yourself, once you finish this course, at least the first step of this course, which takes us weeks to do. I promise you one thing. Once we're done with this first step, you will know the truth about yourself. And once you know the truth about yourself, you can never ever again drink or use drugs under truth. You'll never be able to drink or use drugs again under truth. The only way you'll be able to drink or use drugs again after you learn the truth about yourself is that you need to block yourself off from the truth and buy some insane, stupid lie. But once you know the truth about yourself and finish what we're doing here and go through a complete first step, a thorough first step, and you know the truth about yourself, you'll never be able to drink and use again on that truth. You'll have to block yourself off from the truth with some insane, trivial bullshit. The only way you'll be able to do it. So look what he says here at the bottom of page 23. The tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. That's what we've been talking about. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. You see, so what he's telling me here is some important stuff. I can't use my mind to win. Look what he says. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We're unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So listen, you might want to write this down so you don't forget it. Sane thinking is not as powerful as the disease. Sane thinking is not as powerful as the disease. Because this is telling me that I can't bring to mind the consequences of this with sufficient force. I may think about the consequences, but not with sufficient force to stop myself. And I'll minimize and discount the consequences that quick. How? I'll buy that lie that we talked about. This time it'll be different. So sane thinking is not as powerful as the disease. And we're going to learn in here as we read on, as we study the book, it talks about the sane thinking and the disease. They run parallel. They run parallel. And then the book tells us the sane thinking, the insane thinking always wins out. Somewhere, some way along the way, the sane thinking falls off and the insane thinking is running the show. Then all you have to do is look at your own life experience. We talked about the little boy with the bright light, the flame, right? And he touches it and burns himself. He won't come back and do it again. And I ask you, how many times have you touched the pretty light? Thinking this time is going to be different. So look what he says in the next paragraph. And we talked about this, that almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hastily, readily supplanted with the old third beer idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on the hot stove. There's Deb and her hot stove.
There you are.
When it comes to hot wood burning stoves, she ain't got a damn bit of sense. When it comes to alcohol and drugs, you don't have a damn bit of sense. There's a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove and burning himself. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? That's almost as ridiculous. To me, the most ridiculous thing I ever read in a book when I first got sober was the stupid jaywalker. I thought, what an idiot this guy is, right? But this is almost as silly as that. Come on, I don't have the defense mechanism to not put my hand on the hot stove. I know what somebody said to me. Danny, the hot stove is booze. Danny, the hot stove is cocaine. And I went, oh yeah. I didn't have the mechanism to stop myself from doing that. Didn't have it in me. The alcoholic may say to himself the most casual way, it won't burn me this time. So here's how. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How often have some of us begun to drink in this nonchalant way and after the third or fourth pounded on the bar said to ourselves, for God's sakes, how did I ever get started again? Only to have that door supplanted by, well, I'll stop from the sixth drink. Well, what's the use anyhow? Oh, I see Jim's there. Jim, congratulations. You got 43 years today, huh?
Good, Jim.
Jim. Or yesterday, was it? Yeah. So when this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendency, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. So, if he's placed himself beyond human aid, guess what? Remember we talked about the fellowship? And don't mix up the fellowship with the solution, the steps. The fellowship is what?
Human aid.
Human aid, isn't it? The fellowship is human aid. And the book is telling me that we've placed ourselves beyond human aid. And again, I'm not trying to discount and minimize the power of the fellowship. I've admitted that it's one of the powers. It's just not the power. It's not the solution. So unless these stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history, but for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop but cannot. I know hundreds of people that want to be sober if they just didn't have to stop drinking.
Yeah.
All right, so listen, time's up. We're gonna leave it off there, and we'll pick up and finish There Is a Solution next week. Thanks, guys. See you. Congratulations, Jim. Talk to you guys.
Are we passing the basket?
Yeah.